A Saudi prince just handed Alex Eala $2 million, and Rafael Nadal's jaw hit the floor on live television. Nobody anticipated this. Nobody scripted this. Nobody, not the journalists in that hall, not the federation officials in their pressed suits, not even the seasoned veterans who thought they'd witnessed everything tennis had to offer, was prepared for what unfolded inside that room. This was not a routine endorsement. This was not a photo opportunity arranged by the marketing team. This was something far rarer, far weightier, and far more dangerous in the world of professional sport. A moment where raw power looked a young woman directly in the eye and said, "You matter." But here's what nobody's talking about. Here's the detail buried beneath the headlines and the highlight reels and the social media celebrations. Behind that extraordinary gesture lived a web of politics, ambition, old rivalries, and new money that would shake the very foundations of women's tennis within 72 hours. Rafael Nadal couldn't believe it. The tennis establishment couldn't process it. And a 20-year-old from the Philippines, who once practiced her serve on cracked public courts while dreaming of Wimbledon, suddenly found herself standing at the center of the sporting world's most explosive conversation. So what actually happened? Who orchestrated this moment? And why did it leave one of the greatest champions in tennis history visibly shaken? Settle in, because nothing about this story is simple. There is a particular kind of pressure that no sports psychologist can fully prepare you for, the pressure of being someone's first. Alex Eala understood that pressure before she ever held a professional trophy. Growing up in the Philippines, she absorbed it through every encouraging word whispered by coaches who saw something extraordinary, every national headline that announced her junior victories with the breathless urgency of a country desperate for a sporting icon. The Philippines had produced warriors in boxing, heroes in weightlifting, legends in billiards. But women's tennis at the highest level of the global stage had always felt like someone else's territory. Eala decided quietly and with devastating determination to change that. She arrived at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, as a teenager carrying not just a racket bag, but the collective hope of over 100 million people. Think about that weight for a moment. Think about sitting in a foreign classroom, navigating a foreign language, adjusting to foreign food and foreign weather, while simultaneously knowing that every forehand winner, every backhand error, every match result would be dissected, celebrated, or mourned by an entire archipelago back home. She didn't collapse beneath that weight. She trained harder. Her junior career became the stuff of legend within Philippine sporting circles. She captured the girls' doubles title at the 2022 Australian Open. She climbed junior rankings with a ferocity that made European academies take uncomfortable notice. She wasn't simply developing, she was arriving loudly and unmistakably on a stage that historically belonged to players from wealthy tennis nations with decades of infrastructure, funding, and institutional support behind them. What Eala had, instead, was hunger, absolute, uncompromising hunger. Her transition to the professional circuit carried the familiar turbulence of any young player navigating the brutal economics of the WTA Tour. Travel costs, coaching fees, equipment expenses, tournament entry logistics. The financial architecture of professional tennis is merciless towards players from developing nations, and even prodigies bleed money before they earn it. Sponsorships helped. The Nadal Academy connection opened doors, but the gap between junior promise and professional sustainability remained wide, jagged, and deeply unfair. Through it all, Eala competed. She competed with the joy that television cameras adored, this infectious, luminous quality that made neutral viewers quietly root for her in matches she had no business winning. Opponents who had trained in superior facilities with superior resources and with entire support teams surrounding them found themselves unexpectedly rattled by a young woman who simply refused to accept that the scoreboard told the final story. The Philippines watched. The Philippines prayed. The Philippines argued about her scheduling decisions and her coaching choices and her ranking trajectory with the passionate intimacy reserved for true national heroes. And somewhere in Riyadh, inside a sporting empire being constructed with breathtaking speed and virtually limitless financial ambition, someone was watching too. The Saudi Sports Investment Summit was not designed to generate the kind of headline it ultimately produced. It was conceived as a showcase, a sophisticated, carefully choreographed demonstration of Saudi Arabia's expanding athletic ambitions. Golf had already been transformed by Saudi investment. Football had been electrified. Boxing had been bought, repackaged, and sold back to the world at extraordinary profit. Now, the kingdom's sporting architects were turning their guys towards women's tennis, specifically towards the global, diverse, commercially undervalued territory of women's tennis. The summit gathered players, agents, federation representatives, and sporting celebrities from across the globe. Attendance confirmed influence, attendance confirmed relevance, and attendance for someone like Alex Eala, arriving as one of the sport's most compelling young narratives, confirmed that the world was beginning to understand what the Philippines had always known. Rafael Nadal attended in his capacity as both living legend and academy founder, a figure whose opinion on young tennis talent carried institutional weight. He had watched Eala develop from close proximity. He understood her ability with a precision that casual observers couldn't access. And when his name appeared on the guest list alongside Eala's, the intersection felt almost too cinematic to be coincidental. The ceremony itself began predictably enough. Speeches about investment, presentations about infrastructure, polished slides depicting gleaming new facilities and projected economic returns. The language of money dressed in the vocabulary of passion. Then, Prince Abdullah Al-Saud took the stage, and the room shifted. He was not reading from a prepared text when he began speaking about women's tennis. He spoke with the cadence of genuine conviction, about representation, about the global failure to adequately resource female athletes from underrepresented nations, about the specific and extraordinary case of a young Filipino woman whose talent deserved infrastructure matching its scale.
Rafael Nadal has won 22 Grand Slam titles. He has stood on center court in Wimbledon, under the Parisian clay dust of Roland Garros, beneath the scorching Australian sun, and he has maintained composure in moments that would reduce ordinary humans to rubble. Watching him in that summit hall, the composure cracked. Not dramatically, Nadal is too disciplined, too emotionally intelligent for theatrical displays. But the cameras that captured his face in the seconds following Prince Abdullah's announcement caught something profound. A man genuinely moved, struggling briefly and visibly with feelings he hadn't anticipated needing to manage in a business conference in Riyadh. His eyes glistened, his jaw tightened in that characteristic way, the way it tightens when he is absorbing something significant and processing it with the full weight of his attention. He looked at Eala. He looked at the stage. He looked briefly downward, the way people do when emotion briefly outpaces control. All of it, ultimately, circling around a girl from the Philippines who decided that the world of tennis had underestimated her and dedicated her life to proving it. The question worth sitting with tonight isn't whether she deserved this investment. Of course she did. The real question is, why did it take a Saudi prince to see what the rest of the tennis world should have recognized years ago? Leave your answer below, because this conversation about money and merit and who gets to matter in professional sport is nowhere close to finished. Later, in the corridor outside the main hall, a reporter from a Spanish sports outlet caught him for 90 seconds of unplanned comment. His words, translated from Spanish, carried the unpolished authenticity of genuine feeling rather than media management. She works like nobody I have seen at her age. What happened today? This is right. This is how it should work. Talent deserves support. She deserves this. 90 seconds, spontaneous, unscripted. The clip accumulated 40 million views before midnight. Social media fractured instantly along predictable fault lines, but the fracture was more complex than simple celebration versus criticism. Tennis Twitter erupted with debates about Saudi sports washing, about the political dimensions of the kingdom's investment strategy, about whether an athlete accepting this kind of support was making a personal choice or a political statement. Former players weighed in. Current players posted cryptic responses that their followers spent hours decoding. Commentators who had spent careers covering tennis were suddenly required to navigate the intersection of geopolitics, gender equity, and athletic merit simultaneously, and most of them managed it imperfectly. But beneath all of that noise, one thing remained impossible to dismiss or politicize or reframe: Nadal's face in that moment, unguarded, sincere, and deeply, unmistakably moved. That image became the anchor of the conversation, because whatever anyone thought about Saudi investment strategy or global sports politics, Nadal's emotional response to a young Filipino woman's moment of recognition carried a moral authority that no think piece could diminish. And Eala hadn't even spoken yet. By the following morning, the summit announcement had migrated from sports pages to front pages. This was no longer simply a tennis story. This was a story about power, where it lives, who it recognizes, and who it has historically ignored. The $2 million figure was enormous enough to command attention in any context. Inside the specific structurally underfunded world of women's professional tennis, it landed like an earthquake. The WTA issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the investment while emphasizing the organization's own commitment to player welfare and equal opportunity. Reading between those polished lines, veteran tennis journalists heard what the statement didn't say: a slight discomfort, a subtle defensiveness, an organization acutely conscious of the implicit criticism embedded in a private actor providing what institutions had failed to deliver. Former world #1 players gave interviews that elegantly avoided taking definitive positions while somehow managing to suggest definitive positions. The diplomatic gymnastics were impressive and revealing simultaneously. Within the Philippine sporting community, the response required no such gymnastics. It was immediate, unanimous, and volcanic. Social media platforms in the Philippines experienced traffic surges. Politicians released congratulatory statements. National newspapers ran front-page stories beneath headlines written with exclamation points. The country that had watched Eala carry its hopes on a budget that felt perpetually insufficient was now watching the world acknowledge what it had always claimed. She was genuinely extraordinary. But not every reaction was celebratory. Critics, some thoughtful and some opportunistic, raised questions that deserved engagement. Saudi Arabia's human rights record is documented, debated, and deeply troubling. The kingdom's investment in global sport has been widely characterized as an effort to rehabilitate international perception, a strategy that carries real ethical weight for athletes asked to participate in it. These were legitimate concerns, raised by legitimate voices, and dismissing them as simple jealousy or political interference would be intellectually dishonest. Other critics, less principled, simply resented the disruption of an existing order. Women's tennis has long operated within hierarchies of nationality, of funding access, of media attention that systematically favor players from certain nations and backgrounds. A young Filipino woman being elevated dramatically outside those hierarchies threatened comfortable assumptions about how the sport was supposed to operate and who was supposed to matter.